When you first start Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, especially if you've never had any grappling experience before, you get to try as hard as you want to try to grapple, to try to strangle, try to squeeze somebody, and you're not hurting them. But as you progress, especially as you get deeper into your blue belt, especially once you're a purple belt, you have to start holding back. And this isn't something I anticipated when I was a white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, something I had to learn over time as I got deep into my blue belt and especially into my purple belt days. You have to hold back sometimes. And that's not always obvious if you're used to trying as hard as you can for years. It's very common for people to be a white belt for 2, 3, even 4 years, and you get used to that. And then you start getting into your blue belt where you're having more success, and it's fun, right? It's fun to tap out white belts. Even now, it's still kind of fun to tap out white belts, but it gets to a point where the skill gap is so great that continuing to smash them as hard as you can again and again isn't beneficial. It isn't beneficial to them. Maybe it teaches them toughness. Maybe they can learn some defensive skills, but it's really not beneficial to you anymore. Because if you roll with a day one white belt and you're a good blue belt, you can basically do whatever you want to them. Now, if they've wrestled before, maybe it's a different story, but a brand new white belt, you can do basically whatever you want to them. You can submit them, in your A game especially, as many times as you want in a 5-minute round. And if you continue to do that, especially without giving them pointers by saying, hey, this is how I submitted you, here's how you could mitigate that, they're gonna get demoralized. Maybe not. Maybe there's a filter process where the tough have to survive, but I don't believe that. I think jiu-jitsu can be for anyone. And if you make it to your blue belt and people have taught you, people have been nice to you when you've rolled, maybe you don't realize that, the upper belts hold back against these newer belts because you can teach them. It's sort of your duty, in a way, to help those who come after you because the people who came before you and helped teach you did the same thing. It is almost always helpful to not just hold back against the white belts and not just give them little tips about, hey, this is how I submitted you, this is how you could do better, put your frames like this, roll like this, defend like this. But the best form of this is to put someone in the zone of optimal learning, to try to put them in that flow state. If you've ever rolled with, let's say, a 13-year-old yellow belt and you just smashed him into the mat, you're kind of a douche. And you should take that same mentality to the newer white belts. The way you should roll with them is just enough to let them do their jiu-jitsu, but be just a little bit beyond that. Hold back to the point where you're just letting them have certain things and then escape back to your guard. Just let them pass your guard, but don't give it to them. Make them work for it in a realistic way. This can lead to a problem where they feel like they're never getting better because you're sort of always, as they progress, let's say your skill level is here, their skill level is here, you bring it down and you're just above them. So they have to work really hard and then they match you and you bring it up just a little bit and they work really hard and then they match you. And it can feel like they're never getting better because the gap is always the same as they rise. Over time, you're going to develop better training partners. You're going to have people who know your game because you're going to have to start pulling more tricks out of your hat, so to speak. You're going to have to do different submissions. You're going to have to do different guard passes. You're going to have to sweep them in different ways. And if you can keep them in that zone of optimal learning, before you know it, they're going to be a really good training partner for you because they'll learn your game inside and out and you'll be able to slowly bring them up to where you want to be. If you get the experience of coaching kids classes or even just rolling with some of the smaller, newer, younger people in jiu-jitsu, try to do this because you'll get a lot more out of it as opposed to smashing them into the mat. And it really helps you give back to the jiu-jitsu community. Without a doubt, someone has done this to you, whether you knew it or not. You probably weren't tapping the brown belt out. Now, maybe you were, but more likely than not, they were letting you work. And that's not to say you have to let people submit you and be fake about that. If you want, you can take it to the point where you just give them good positions and let them work from there. Maybe you let them submit you, but don't fill them with delusions. Don't trick them into thinking they're way better than they are, but really try to be just above their skill level. And you'll find you'll get a lot more out of that role than you would have expected. In my opinion, you can learn something from everybody. You can learn something from a white belt. Absolutely. Even a day one white belt. They might react in a way that you don't expect. As you keep them in that zone of optimal learning, you'll start to develop a friendship with them because it's more fun for them to roll. There was a study done on mice where the larger mouse would play with the smaller mouse. And the larger mouse was so much larger that if they wanted to, they could completely dominate the other mouse 100% of the time. But the larger mouse, if they let them win at least 30% of the time, then they would continue to play. But if the larger mouse didn't let them win any of the times, eventually the smaller mouse would stop asking the larger mouse to play. And that can sort of happen in the jiu-jitsu mats. If you are a more advanced rank and you just beat on the lower ranks again and again, eventually they're going to stop coming to you to train. And no one wants to be that rather aggressive blue belt who can't find any training partners because you're just going to smash them into the mat. And maybe you can be a tougher training partner, but I think you're going to get a lot out of giving people less resistance. Keep them in that zone of optimal learning. Tell me what you think in the comments.